and frankly troubling article on the front page of the Washington Post this morning, and this is their biggest story, their leading page one story. And it's that more than, well, I'll just quote from it. It's by Craig Whitlock and Nate Jones. More than 500, this is the first paragraph, more than 500 retired U.S. military personnel, including scores of generals and admirals, have taken lucrative jobs since 2015 working for foreign governments, most in countries known for human rights abuses and political repression. In Saudi Arabia, for example, 15 retired U.S. generals and admirals have worked as paid consultants for the defense ministry since 2016. Now, this is the defense ministry that is headed up by or overseen by the dictator of the country, essentially, Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And, you know, the country's de facto ruler is how the Washington Post defines him. And, you know, this is the guy, of course, back in 2018 who ordered the murder of Washington Post reporter Jamal Khashoggi. This is in the Washington Post today, by the way. They go on to note that Saudi Arabia's paid advisors have included retired Marine General James L. Jones, a national security advisor to President Barack Obama, and retired Army General Keith Alexander, who led the National Security Agency under Obama and President George W. Bush. Others who have worked as consultants for the Saudis since Khashoggi's murder include a retired four-star general and a former commanding general of U.S. troops in Afghanistan. And the Post had to sue for this under the Freedom of Information Act, and it was a 2-year battle to get this information about which people we brought into the U.S. military, we trained, we gave access to sensitive and in many cases top secret information, and informed them about everything that's going on. And then they're going and taking this stuff to Saudi Arabia. They're taking it, well, you know, I started to say, or I was thinking of saying, they're taking this to our enemies, but Saudi Arabia is technically an ally of the United States, even if in the last few weeks they have instead allied themselves with Vladimir Putin's Russia. I remember a time back in the late 90s, in the early 90s, when we were hopeful that Russia would become an ally of the United States. When, this was Schroeder in Germany, his whole thing was, oh yeah, let's start buying oil and gas from Russia because, that will integrate them into the European Union and then they'll be better friends. Well, they're not allies anymore. But in any case, is this something that, we should be going along with? I mean, they go on to say the Post identified some of the names and redacted details through reporting. It has continued to sue the armed forces and the State Department to receive the rest of the information. The military is saying that releasing information about former U.S. military figures who are now helping out countries that may not have our best interests at heart, let's put it that way, rather than calling them enemies or allies, they're going to fight this. In the Post reporting, in legal motions, U.S. officials argued that releasing the information would violate former service members' privacy and could subject them to embarrassment and harassment and unfairly harm their public reputation. Well, aren't those considerations that you take before you take any job? I mean, I've held, controversial jobs in my life, and I was willing to say, okay, I think for the moment this is a good idea. Maybe in the future it won't be a good idea, and in fact it wasn't. But you make your decisions and you live with them and you stand by them. I think that's pretty straightforward. They go on to note that the Project on Government Oversight, POGO, a nonprofit watchdog group based in Washington, filed similar public records lawsuits against the State Department. POGO shared their documents with the Washington Post. But generally, under federal law, this, again, the Washington Post, retired U.S. military personnel are restricted from receiving anything of value from foreign governments that could compromise their sworn allegiance to the United States. And that comes out of the Emoluments Clause, by the way, which forbids federal office holders to accept gifts, jobs, or titles from any king, prince, or foreign state without the consent of Congress. They note in the Washington Post, the law applies to military retirees because they can be recalled to active duty at any time. In 1977, Congress delegated the authority to approve veterans' foreign work to the Pentagon and the State Department. So in order to essentially get a waiver from the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution, which forbids people in our military from taking money from foreign governments in exchange for working for them, our State Department and our Pentagon has been giving these waivers to these people. I think, frankly, if they want to make some extra money in their retirement, they should, get a gig on one of the cable networks or write a book or, become a consultant to a defense contractor. I mean, these are all areas that, they all do this. They go on to note here. Documents show that one case involved retired Army Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, 63, who briefly served as National Security Advisor to President Donald Trump. An investigation by the Defense Department's Inspector General found that Flynn collected $449,807 from both Russia and Turkey in 2015, 1 year after he retired from the Army, and he failed to clear his work with U.S. officials. So here's Mike Flynn. I mean, this is what he was sentenced to go to jail for until Donald Trump commuted his sentence and pardoned him. But here's Michael Flynn, selling out to the Russians and the Turks. Flynn's unauthorized work, they note, for foreign governments came to light after he was photographed sitting next to Putin in Moscow. His tie to Russian officials led to his downfall. In 2017, he pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI about his contacts with the Russian ambassador to the United States. And Trump pardoned him 3 years later. And my recollection of that was that, he had been giving the Russian ambassador assurances that the United States government wasn't going to go be investigating things that he didn't want. It goes on there. Flynn's work for Russia helped prompt Congress to pass legislation in 2019 and 2020 requiring the Pentagon to submit annual reports to lawmakers about retired generals and admirals who work for foreign powers. They note, however, since then the Pentagon has complied, but its reports include only a few lines of information and do not name the generals and admirals. This is interesting. Only one of these generals or admirals apparently is working for Russia. He took a $300,000 job with a satellite launch company based in the U.S., but majority owned by the Russian government. International Launch Services, Inc. is majority owned by the Khrushchev State Research and Production Space Center in Moscow. That's fascinating. They also note that no other incidents of retired military personnel working for China, North Korea, Iran, Cuba, or Venezuela. Well, that's reassuring. Documents show that 25 retirees from the Air Force, Navy, Army, and Marine Corps were granted permission to take jobs in Saudi Arabia, however. And this is, this is the area that has got a lot of people thinking, it's a little sketchy. It's just a little sketchy. I've got an amazing geeky science for you here on the other side of this break, how junk food literally takes years off your life and how to get years back, even if you're in your 60s, how to reclaim your life. This is an amazing story. Stick around. We'll be right back with that. And your calls right here in just